continuing on our conversation this month about our place in the cosmos. Let's just put it that way. It's about divine order. And this month we're talking about where we fit, where we as humans, we as our individual expression, you, who you are, where you fit in the design scheme of things. Because sometimes I think that that's the biggest challenge, is for us to figure out where we fit in our life, right? Sometimes it feels like life is happening, and all these things are happening for all these people around us, and I'm in the middle of it, and my life is falling apart. And sometimes we hit these rocky patches, and I don't know about you, but I go and look to the stars at night and say, what the heck is this about? Where do I belong? And so one of the things that when the concept of divine order showed up as our talking point for the month, I sat for a long time to try and figure out what divine order means. What is it that would serve us as we explore it? And at the same time, I was preparing for our foundations class, which I'm having so much fun in, by the way, and like the announcement said, this is the last Tuesday to get in. If you want to come join us, just come. Just show up. Just come and show up. There's not a sign-up sheet out there anymore, but just show up on Tuesday at 6. It'll be great. So as I was preparing for that, what I remembered was that I found my place in the cosmos when I discovered the science of mind philosophy. I found how everything fits together when we talk about what this philosophy teaches. And so what we've been doing is walking through this month our statement of belief. And it's all up there on our YouTube channel if you've missed a couple weeks. But the idea is today we're talking about our inner guide. We're talking about the fact that each one of us has a direct connection. I like to call it the bat phone. That we have the bat phone to God from within. And so often we're seekers, right? A lot of people who are drawn to the spiritual realm, a lot of people who are drawn to this philosophy, a lot of the new thought, new age, interesting things, we're seekers. We want to know more. We want to explore more. We want to understand more. And so we go seeking. We try all sorts of different kinds of techniques. How many have done the floaty tanks and the salt caves? And we go and we do all of our oils. And none of it is bad. All of it is great. But everything that happens outside points us back within. Everything that we're trying to seek and to find something real, it's pointing us back to that direct connection that we have with Spirit. And so we're talking today about our inner guide. We're talking today about how we are guided and supported by Spirit from the inside out. For so long, we were taught to pray up to God, right? There's this image, that we're taught to pray up to God, out to something else. We are told and we're taught that we're not worthy, and that we've been born with a black mark on our souls, and that we best hope that we do pretty good here so that in the end we're judged well, right? And so many of us have been hammered with that idea of not good enough, of no way that we're going to be able to do good works enough in this life, and that we have to hope that something's going to shift, and that some benevolent force is going to just look upon us and realize that we don't really have a black mark and that we can get into heaven. We've been taught that sin is our nature, right? That there's no possible way that we could really do anything right. I mean, I used to think I was exaggerating that idea that that's the message that we're taught, but we are taught that. And that there's, from not only in our religious institutions, but even just turn on the TV. It's been amazing to me because we got rid of TV a couple months ago. So, and I didn't watch it very much. I'm addicted to I'll name it, I'm addicted to my iPad. I watch everything on my iPad now, but without commercials, right? So whenever you're watching TV, every commercial is trying to tell you that there's something wrong with you, because they have to sell you something to make it better. Everything on television is telling you that you're broken, that your life is not as good as everybody else. Is having a great party on TV. Have you ever seen that? Oh yeah, it's so fun over here. They even changed, what's that whole deal with that Funner California thing? I don't understand it, but whatever, we'll talk about that at the beach. But the idea that it's more fun over there, or we're having a great time, and you're missing out, right? Because you're not in the know, or you're not good enough. And so if you buy this, or if you go here, if you do this, you're going to be great. We are immersed in a culture that's trying to tell us that we're limited. And none of that is true. It's been amazing for me to turn it off, to see how different it is to live without those messages bombarding us. Because, we all know that, right? We all know that they want to sell us stuff. But I don't think we realize how deeply ingrained we have been brought up with it. How many years has it been that we've had these messages on top of us, on top of us, on top of us? It becomes a part of our subconscious belief system. And when that gets in there, it's kind of hard to weed those little weeds out, to pull those weeds out. But that's what we intend to do. We intend here to remind us that we are whole, perfect, and complete. That we are as we are meant to be. Because each one of us is a divine emanation. Each one of us is an individualized expression of God. And we've come into this life to be who we are. And just think about any time someone has been forced into being something that they're not. How many of us have had that experience? That either our parents or our teachers or society wants us to be something that we're not. And we're forced into trying to be like, okay, that's not, okay, I can do that, I can do that. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves completely pretending. We're not living, we're pretending. We've come here to live and to be who we are. And there's nothing wrong with us, just as we are. I love that Bridget Jones movie. When Mark says to her, I like you just as you are. And nobody can believe it. All of her friends keep walking around saying, you like her just as she is. They're not used to it. Because we're supposed to be who they want us to be. But that's not the truth. We are here to be who we are and allow everybody else to get used to it. And so the only way we do that is when we are connected to the truth of who we are. And when we're connected to the truth of who we are, then we have all of the guidance and all the support we need to live fully. And that's because we're connected to our inner guide. Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, says that the enlightened of every age have taught that back of all things is one unseen presence, one cause, one power, one life, one intelligence, one substance. And that each of us are an emanation of that light, and that we have a direct and constant connection to it. We do have an inner guide. I was thinking about it this week, and often I hear people talk about their coaches. Like coaching has been a huge thing in the last 15 or 20 years, right? Like so many people have become coaches, and I don't want to say anything bad about it because we can support each other and coach each other. And if you do a certification for coaching, that's great. That's kind of like what we think of our spiritual practitioners, our spiritual coaches, right? They're coaches. They guide us and remind us of who we are. But we all have the best coach. We have the coach of all coaches that's there for you whenever you need it. It's God. And it takes us putting our attention upon it and welcoming it and actually learning how to listen to it. There are so many voices coming at us, and we are so used to looking outside of ourselves that it gets confusing. It gets hard to follow that message, that spirit, as it reveals itself to us. And so the idea of today is, how do we listen to it? How do we wake up to that? How do we remember that we are connected to Spirit all the time? And so returning once again to our statement of beliefs, the Declaration of Principles, we are up to this one. Okay, so we believe in the unity of all life, and that the highest God and the innermost God is one God. And so the idea of this is that Spirit is an overdwelling and an indwelling presence. All right, it's through all things, and it's closer than we can imagine. So it is the power and I call it the divine architect. It has brought forth all that exists. It has created all that exists. It continues to sustain its creation. But we are each part of that creation, and so it is as close to us as we can get. I love the quote by Tennyson that says, "It is closer is he than breathing, and nearer than hands and feet." The Spirit is the divine lover of your soul, and it is always with you. And so we can think of God as that presence out there, because it is. But we can't deny the fact that it's in here, because it is. And so we don't lose that. You know, one of the complaints I get sometimes, it's not a complaint, but conversations we have about the philosophy and the way that we look at things is that we lose the personalness of God. Because we talk about the creative process and we talk about how the law just creates the law of cause and effect. And so that's how we operate. If we believe something, we create it. And so there's this impersonal spirit. But the truth is that's only half the story. There is the law that we create our lives out of, but there is the love that guides us. There's the love that inspires us. There's the love that moves us. And it knows us so intimately that it's there for us if we allow it. But the problem is this, again, we have our eyes open for most of the day. We are looking out into the world for most of the day. And the only time you really feel the presence is when we have our eyes closed, is when we are in our spiritual practice. And when we are allowing all of the voices, the ping pong, you get the picture of, I always think of Pong. I'm a child of the 70s, so Pong was the first video game, right? Basically. And so the thoughts just keep going back and forth, boing, 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 boing. And I have to figure out, what's the true voice here? Is this my voice? Is this a divine voice? Is this guidance that makes sense? Because let me tell you, when Spirit speaks, it usually doesn't make any sense. That's how you know. Sometimes God will give you a message, give you an inspiration, will give you an idea, and you think, okay, that's crazy. And we can't see how perfect it is for our soul yet. But usually if it scares you a little bit, it's probably the divine voice coming through. Because God doesn't say, okay, stay back. Why don't you stay home today and hide in your closet? God's not going to tell you that. God's going to invite you to express, to expand. I'm fond of saying that God doesn't speak English, and I've had some interesting dialogue about that, debate about that. And what I think is that God, I think sometimes we hear God, we interpret God as that voice in English words, but God speaks in knowing. And so when we know something without knowing how we know it, that's the way the divine reveals itself. And it's through our intuition. And so the whole process of evolution is a continual process of awakening. The Bible teaches us that which is born of the Spirit is the Spirit. And Jesus taught that we are made in the image and likeness of the divine. We are made in the image and likeness of God. We are all part of that divine creation. He was truly the master teacher. And we know him as Jesus the Christ, right? Well, the thing about the Christ is that it's not a last name. And it's not a person. Christ is that consciousness. It's that consciousness of oneness. Taking on the Christ is what we do. And that evolution of our souls, that evolution of who we are, is to aspire to that idea of the Christ. And you can call it Christ consciousness. You can call it enlightenment. You can call it being a bodhisattva, right? Because that's the idea in Buddhism that we attain enlightenment, but we stay in this life until everyone attains it. I don't care what we call it, but that's where we're headed. We're headed to a place of realizing that we are one with something greater. That our lives are lived in that essence and in that presence. Jesus was truly the master teacher because he knew completely that he was one with God. He knew that his words had power. When he said, take up your bed and walk, he knew that they could do it. He knew that he had no limitation, so he could walk on water. He could turn water into wine because he knew that it wasn't him. It's not I, but the Father within that doeth the works. He knew he was living so aligned to the Spirit that there's no limitation, that there's nothing that couldn't be done. And what I love is that he never tried to play it off like it was him. His ego was completely in alignment. He knew he could do it because he knew his relationship with the Divine Father, with that divine presence that we call God. But he also knew that it wasn't anything special. These and greater shall ye do. He kept telling everybody around him, you're going to do this, you can do this, you can do this. And it's right there. He said, this is my legacy, is that you shall do this, be able to do it. And that each and every one of us has the opportunity to step fully into our power and into our presence. What limitations are you ready to let go of? What limitation, how can you let go of that limited thinking of who you think you are? The Christ is the level of awakening that we aspire to. And so again, we believe that God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence. It's always there, no matter what. We're part of that unity of being. But we have this thing. There's this thing, and it's the greatest gift we've ever been given, and it's the thing that screws us up the most, which is free choice. Right? We get to choose. We get to choose whether we want to live in alignment with it, whether we want to acknowledge the fact that there's something greater happening here, or we can pretend that it's not. Now, it doesn't do anything to God. God is still God. God's still going to love us. God's still going to give of itself to us and through us. God's still going to be ever present. But we get to look the other way. We get to turn the spigot off. We get to pretend that that's all a whole bunch of hogwash that Rev K stands up there and spouts off about every Sunday. We get to do that. But it's not going to change the fact of God. And when we get to a place where we're at the end of our rope, where we're at our bottom, when we're in the dark night, we can't see 1 inch in front of our face, guess what's going to happen? We're going to wake up to, well, maybe there is something else. And is God going to say, hey, sorry, you missed your shot. I'm not going to be there for you now. You didn't like me then. No. Love is the givingness of the divine to its own creation, and it's ever there. No matter what we say, no matter what we do, no matter where we've been or what we've done, there's nothing that can keep us from the love of God. It's personal to us. Ernest Holmes talks about it as practicing the present. So does Joel Goldsmith, has a whole book about it, and we use in our practitioner training classes. But we're called to practice the presence of the divine. And so what that is it's making Spirit welcome in our hearts and in our minds. I love my friends who ask me if I have Jesus in my heart, because I can say yes, absolutely. Jesus as a divine emanation, as a divine teacher that has come to show us the way. Absolutely, I've got Jesus in my heart. Because I've got God in my heart. And so we make welcome the Spirit. We open to create a space in each of our day that makes welcome the unknown, the unseen. We spend time listening for that voice. We take the pause to remember that something greater is happening here. And when we can do that, when we do that on a regular basis, when we start to work that muscle, what happens is that the floodgates open and it starts to trickle a little bit. You can start to feel maybe some little synchronicities starting to come in. Maybe an opportunity showed up that you didn't think was possible. Maybe some situations that seemed like they were glued together started to kind of break apart. Maybe somebody who had judged you or had treated you unfairly or poorly or chose, not the highest way of being in the world around you. That's a nice way of saying it, right? I'm trying to find nice ways of saying they didn't just screw you over. But so maybe they wake up a little bit. Maybe something shifts in a way that we thought wasn't possible. That begins to happen when we start to live close to the Spirit of our lives. So we recognize that God is here. And then the last one for today is that we believe in a direct revelation of truth through our intuitive and spiritual nature. and that anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. So this one has some interesting points to it. The direct revelation of truth. We don't need someone of a higher authority to be an intermediary for us with God. There isn't a holy person, and believe me, I'm grateful for your respect, but I am not any holier than anybody else. I've just read a whole heck of a lot and prayed a whole lot over the last 20 years. So it's not that we need someone else to do it for us. Because like I said before, anything that we find outside that resonates within points us back within. Any good spiritual teacher is going to tell you and ask you, what do you know about God? Where is God in your life? How does this happen from within you? Now, not to say that there are people who feel holy, right? There are people who, I call it feeling holy, but are spiritual or whatever, and they're attractive, right? You just kind of want to be near them. You kind of want to go and hear them and sit next to them and be with them because they make us feel better because we are realizing their truth and that it's a possibility for us. Anytime somebody on the outside feels attractive to us, it's because they're lighting something up within our own being. And so we want to pay attention not only to what the aspect is outside, it's not about that person. It's about what they remind you of within you. So what is that aspect of love or of comfort or of welcome or of fun or whatever it is that is reminding you that this is a moving, holy relationship that you have with that person? And whether it's someone on the television or someone you listen to or someone you live with. That there are just some people, and maybe they've never read a book about spirit. Maybe they don't even go to church. God forbid. Could you imagine a minister talking about going and hanging? Let's go hang with someone who doesn't go to church. That was supposed to be a joke. My church is my business. I think we've got something special here. But I also recognize that you don't have to be here to be holy. But we do have to be here to remind ourselves that we are holy when we forget. And that happens. It happens when we allow ourselves to get pulled, our consciousness to get pulled outside of us. And so the other thing is that we believe that anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. Each and every one of us has that possibility of being a revealer of truth. Isn't there something refreshing when someone's just honest? Have you noticed that lately? That it's really nice when someone can just be honest. When we can cut through all the baloney and all the noise and all the stuff that's happening and all of the he said, she said, whatever. When someone can just be vulnerable and honest. That's a holy moment. And when we can be honest with ourselves, that's a powerful, creative, holy moment. That is the beginning of a new adventure for each and every one of us. And so one of the things that I think we can be honest is when we are connected to our intuition. It's through our intuition that we have that direct connection to the divine. And it's through our intuition that we are guided in the direction to allow for our spirits and our souls to express fully here. So intuition is defined as the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. Our inner guide speaks from within. And so again, that pesky gift of free choice is the thing that gets us in trouble because we can choose to ignore it. I think most of us have an experience of intuition for the times that we don't follow it from when we do. Yes? How many times have I said to myself, God, I knew that. I knew not to go to Costco at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew not to drive down that street. I knew it wasn't the right thing. And still I did it anyway. And that's how we get to learn what our intuition starts to sound like, because it's not a voice, it's a knowing. Our intuition is that way that we know things without knowing how we know it. Our intuition is that which guides us in such a strong way when we allow ourselves to hear it. And And again, the question is, are we allowing ourselves to hear it? Are we allowing ourselves to be connected to the Spirit? Or are we so afraid of being judged as being woo-woo or weird or, oh, those spiritual people? Or are we afraid that we're going to live a life that doesn't look like what everybody else thinks our life is supposed to look like? Are we afraid of being judged because our relationship has failed, or we have decided to change our work for something that's a little bit more fulfilling but a little less profitable? Are we afraid of being judged for that? Are we afraid of being judged at all in any way? That's the thing that keeps us from our own truth. It's the thing that keeps us from stepping forth and following that intuition. Even though we can't see 3 moves down the road, how that's going to bring us exactly where we need to be, exactly what we've wanted for our whole entire lives. We get to have what we want. We get to have the life we have dreamed of. But we've got to be clear about what that is first. And we have to know that it's possible. And then we have to trust God. Because this is not only your life. This is God's life. We have been implanted with this divine spark. We have been created by this divine mind. We have been empowered by this spiritual power that has created the universe to create a magnificent masterpiece, which is our life. It's the one thing we're here to do. And those desires of our hearts have been implanted by the divine. And so it's not like I want something and God doesn't really want it for me. That doesn't happen. So if there's something you really want, you get to have it if you allow yourself to walk the path and accept it. But we don't do this alone. We don't do this out of context of life. Everything that happens in our life happens in context to life. And not only do we have to accept it, but we have to embrace it and allow it to unfold. We have to allow it to express. And so we do that again by practicing the presence. We come back to practicing the presence. It's in our prayer work and our meditation. It's in the pause. It's in taking time to care for yourself. It's in realizing that you are worthy. I used to not like the idea of the phrase, the divine child of God. Anybody who took a prayer class with me knows. I would tell them to cross that out, don't say it. It's the whole conversation behind why I did that. But, that being said, you are a divine child of God. You are the divine creation. You are the Spirit's emanation. And you are precious to it. And so, if we are not listening to that infinite wisdom, we are cutting off a whole side of our experience of life. Why work so hard? Why struggle so much? When we surrender into knowing that we are part of something greater and allow ourselves to be carried to where it's taking us, we will have joy there. But we have to listen, and we have to be present. And we have to let go of all those things that get in the way. So what I want you to remember is this, is that you have a guide. You have your own coach. And you know what? You don't have to pay them. You just have to listen. Let's walk through this week and listen to that divine song being sung as our life. Let's listen to that inner message of what's guiding you. And I'll give you a couple of hints here as we finish. If it's telling you anything about, you better be careful and not do that, you know it's not God. Okay? God's not going to tell you a limitation. If it is telling you specific instructions, go here, do that, do this, do that, that's not necessarily God. But the guidance comes as a deep knowing of the power and the excitement that you can create in this life. When you hook into that, you can know that's God. Welcome it. Sit with it. Be with it. Practice the presence as it. And you will see how its guidance and its support will allow you in creating a magnificent experience of life. Because that's why we're here. And so it is.